Welcome to this easy line and wash watercolour tutorial. Let's get started. So to make drawing the little pot easier, I'm just drawing round a cup, and it's just to get it to look symmetrical. I'm actually starting out by using an HB pencil, and as you can see here, I'm just making some minor adjustments. It doesn't have to be exactly like the photograph either, so you can design your own pot or vase. So I'm just shaping the top of the vase here and sort of drawing in the sort of decoration at the front there. I'm also sketching in a little bit of the cast shadow. I'm using rough 300 grams watercolour paper. It's on a block. I do love line and wash. You can sort of just sketch very easily, and this way if you draw the pencil first, you don't have to worry too much then about the pen and making mistakes. However, I do like using the pen first as well without using any pencil marks. There's a nice freedom to it, so you can decide. But if you're a beginner just starting out, you may want to just sketch in pencil first of all, then draw in with pen, and then once you're happy with the sketch, you can actually rub out all your pencil lines before you start painting. So I'm just sketching in now the little flowers. What I really liked about this photograph, it is simple. It's a nice pretty photograph. You've got the flowers, the leaves, the pot and the cast shadow, so you can sort of draw it sort of quite simply. You don't have to draw every sort of little leaf or stem. You can just keep it really nice and simple. So what I'm going to do now is just rub out some of the lines that I left from the cup because I've shaped the actual pot. And I'm going to start now drawing with the pen. This is a waterproof Fineliner pen, and I'll put a link for this pen in the description below. But I'm sort of very loosely sketching over the top of those pencil marks, and you don't have to sort of draw exactly what you've drawn in pencil. It was just for guidance really. So what you want to do as well is don't try to join up every single mark. Try to have sort of broken lines so they're not all sort of completely closed lines. That way, if you do make some sort of mistake, you can sort of disguise it with some cross-hatching marks with the pen. It's a lot more forgiving that way. As you can see here, I'm just sort of scribbling on these lines here, having these broken sort of sketchy lines. This is hatching now. I'm going to cross hatch over the top of that to create the look of shading. The light is coming from the left, so the shadows are on the right hand side, and I'm just sort of scribbling in some of the dark earth here as well. Try not to fill in with too much black ink because you want to sort of paint the darks here with a wash later on. So what I'm doing now is I'm just rubbing out all of the pencil lines, and it comes off really nicely, ready for me to do a little bit of watercolour painting. So I'm starting off with some cerulean here. I'm putting a tiny touch of magenta in there, so it's like a very pale sort of grey colour. And I'm painting the very palest wash on the left hand side because that's the lightest part. And I'm going to mix up slightly creamier paint now and just dropping in, this is a tiny touch of phthalo blue. You can use Prussian blue or even ultramarine with some burnt sienna, sort of greyed down blue grey. And I'm sort of just dropping this colour now in, sort of wet in wet. On the right hand side, just making it look more interesting and just build up these shadow colours. I've actually added a touch of Paynes grey, using Paynes grey and the phthalo blue. Now you get a nice cool sort of blue grey colour, painting this wet in wet at the bottom. Now with pen and wash, I really like to be loose. I don't want to paint like I'm sort of painting by numbers, and you don't want to add too much darks either. You want to be able to see the pen marks coming through the watercolour. That's why it's quite nice to make sure the watercolour is really wet and dilute, so that you don't sort of make it too opaque that you can't see the pen. Remember, this is line and wash, so you want to be able to see the line as well. So I'm just painting on this cast shadow now, using the Paynes grey with the phthalo blue and just softening the edges with a clean damp brush. Remember, in watercolour less is more, so try not to be too tempted to fiddle too much, to overwork. Leave the sort of spaces that you haven't painted up to the imagination of the viewer who's looking at the painting. So I'm just adding some cerulean here, and I'm just spattering a little bit of cerulean onto the wet surface. Now you don't have to do this, but I just find it's fun to do. It creates texture, but also it stops me from overworking. So I'm just using a little bit of magenta here. I do decide to use permanent rose, actually, and a touch of opera rose, just trying to find the best pink for these flowers. It's a really pretty pale pink. So working wet on dry, using my size 10 brush, but then just sort of dropping in water as well, keeping the outside of the edges of the petals a little bit stronger. So here, painting wet on dry, sort of a medium consistency of the permanent rose, and then pushing sort of dilute, very dilute, puddly water into that paint there, and just see what happens. And you don't have to paint all of the white paper. Leave some areas unpainted as well. That's what works so nicely for pen and wash or line and wash. So I'm just going to give my pink flowers a little spatter, and I'm going to allow them to dry. And while they're drying, I'm mixing up a little bit of cadmium yellow here with a touch of green. Any green will do, with a little bit of the pink to paint some of those sort of warm coloured stems in, wet on dry with my size 10 brush. You can see I'm just literally using one brush stroke. So keep everything to the minimum, try not to overwork, keep it really nice and fresh. This is some cadmium yellow with some cerulean, and I'm painting this sort of yellow green wet on dry. So I'm going to start off with this yellow green and then add more of a mid green, adding a little bit more of the yellow with the phthalo blue here, or the cerulean. So you've got this mid green, and I am just sort of painting in some of the longer leaves there, and I'm going to just mix up a slightly stronger colour now, adding a little bit more of the phthalo blue to the yellow, and just adding it really towards the bottom of the sort of near the soil where the leaves are a little bit darker. and just sort of blending that in there. So this is a little bit of burnt sienna and Paynes grey. I'm painting wet on dry, sort of stippling really with the tip of my brush, letting it run into the leaves there. That's quite nice as well to create some shadow colours, but it ran a little bit too much, so I'm just lifting off with my paper towel, and I've decided just to spatter that area and around the vase as well, again so that I don't overwork this area. And I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of table salt onto the damp dark paint there to create some texture later. Adding a touch of Opera Rose to these petals here just to give it a little bit more oomph, so that really brightens up those petals there, using my size 6 brush, painting damp into damp with that Opera Rose. You still can use a little bit more permanent if you want to, just softening some of those leaves here and there as well. And I'm going to add a little bit of dark to sort of the centre of some of the flowers there, using my size 6 brush with a mixture of magenta and a touch of the phthalo blue, only a tiny touch. I want it to be a dark pink, so just sort of painting that in damp into damp. And I'm going to spatter a little bit more of that slightly darker colour there, and I'm going to allow my painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to absorb that paint to create some lighter textures. It didn't really do as much as I'd like, but it does have some texture there, so I'm quite happy with that. So what I quite like doing with line and wash is I like to sort of do another layer of the pen to sharpen up some of the details and just sketch in marks here and there, especially maybe if I wasn't sure earlier. Now I can see the painting for what it is, and as you can see there now, I'm just sort of sketching in, and it really does bring that drawing to life and brings it forward. Sometimes when you put a layer of watercolour on the line, it does push it back, so this way you can actually really embellish and bring those lines forward. And I'm building up some of the cross hatching here, really sort of darkening that right hand side of the pot there. And I'm going to brush off that salt as well. It's dried off there, so I'm just going to sketch in there. I've actually changed my pen. It's actually a slightly thicker nib just to create these darker marks. I was using a 0.5 nib before. This is a 0.8, so it's just slightly thicker, and it really does bring the detail forward, and it creates more darks as well and a thicker line. I'm just sort of drawing on some dots and marks here and there. As you can see there, I'm just sort of drawing in a few more details on the leaves, the stems and the flowers as well, just to really sort of sharpen up the details here and there, and just drawing with lines really quite loose, quite, you know, just a little bit of detail here and there makes all the difference. I've decided just to draw a few sort of sketchy marks on the petals as well to sort of finish off, because they are kind of the stars of the show. So just to give them a little bit more attention, I'm just going to sign and date my little sketch here as well to finish off. And here is a close-up of the painting. I'm really quite pleased with it. I love this little photograph as well. So I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and that it inspires you to get your sort of sketching pens out and try a little bit of line and wash. If you have any questions about this tutorial, please put them in the comments section below. And if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel where you will get updates of my latest tutorials. And if you'd like to learn more about watercolour, get access to my exclusive tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.